Hello and welcome to AWCI's webinar, OSHA, There Are No Secrets, Only Misconceptions. I am Brianna Bernstein, Advertising and Media Manager at AWCI. Before we start, a few housekeeping items. All attendees should be on mute during today's presentation, and should you have any questions during that time, please submit them by clicking on the question icon at the top right of your screen. We'll address all the questions at the end of the presentation. Today we are joined by Don Pilz and Matt Taylor. Don is AWCI's Director of Technical Services and will lead this conversation about OSHA. Matt Taylor is the Vice President of Safety and Risk at OCP Contractors, Inc. in Toledo, Ohio. With more than 30 years, Matt is a past OSHA inspector and a past chair of AWCI's Safety and Health Committee. Welcome, Don and Matt. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Actually, it's going to be Matt leading this. I'll just be asking the questions. So, Matt, take it away.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. And I know a lot of you are busy, especially here in the summer. So we'll just jump right to it. So when we talk about OSHA and we kind of get into the history, we really have to get into some of the key cases that developed over time and where they came from and how it set the stage for the stuff we deal with today. I got three of them that really came up, and they're not all construction cases. We got Marshall versus Barlow. This is a case that went to the Supreme Court and actually set the stage for warrantless inspections. OSHA has to have a reason for coming onto your site, and it has to be specific. You can't just say, hey, we're here to inspect construction because we want to inspect construction. That may cause them to have to get a warrant here. So a lot of people fear the fact that a warrant may make them upset. And I will tell you, it depends on the inspector. As an inspector myself, I never got upset about it. I just kind of took it as they knew their rights, right? There was a couple times actually as an inspector where I was hoping they were going to ask me for a warrant, and because I knew I couldn't get one, and unfortunately they didn't. All right, so it wasn't construction; it was more general industry in those and some of these, but yeah.
Well, Matt, walk me through this then. Let's say I'm a contractor. OSHA shows up on my site and I ask for a warrant. The officer says he doesn't have one. What is my recourse then as a contractor?
Well, so usually they don't have one. You as a subcontractor, so we got general contractors, we got subcontractors, we have prime contractors. So if you as a subcontractor ask for a warrant to inspect your part of the whatever that complaint or whatever why they're there, the general contractor can still let them on. The owner of the building can let them on. They can just circle the whole construction site and go to the owner that you're constructing for and ask for a warrant there, and they can get on. But if myself as a subcontractor, if the GC allowed them to come on and do the inspection, or the prime contractor said, yeah, you can come in and inspect our stuff, that limits their inspection. To talk to our employees and to talk to our management, right? They need to get a warrant. They can take all the pictures they want, but as far as the interview processes go and asking and requesting documentation, all that stuff would contend on them getting a warrant for your organization.
Okay. All right. So take it a step further. So I know you said you don't mind if they ask, but on an average officer, what if I insisted on a warrant? Does that put a target on my back as a contractor? They're going to come twice as aggressive at me if I make a big deal about that?
I'm not going to lie. There's some areas where that might happen, right? If you're a contractor that's always asking for warrants, a lot of times OSHA will come with an anticipatory warrant, right? They're going to already have it in hand when they get there because they know they're coming to inspect you. But believe me, when they're coming with that kind of warrant, they have a reason to be there, right? The question is, like, if they're there for an accident or something like that, they probably have good reason to be there. But I'm hearing more and more of these cases in which they're just showing up to the job site. And we'll cover some of those areas where there's some question there, but they have to have a reason. You can't just allow them in. And I go back to this idea, you know, we look at ourselves sometimes outside of our rights when we talk about OSHA and going to the police idea. Police show up at your door and they say, hey, we were told that you have marijuana inside. We want to come in and look. What's your response, Don?
Where's your warrant?
You have no marijuana in your house, right? You
Yeah.
have no drugs in your house. What's your response, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we just have to think along those lines.
Okay. All right. So you said earlier, the GC already allowed the inspector on site. Can he talk to my people as a sub or pull my records without a warrant?
No, he can't. He shouldn't be doing either one of those. However, if he happens to walk by and doesn't know that that's a OCP employee and you start talking to them and your employee starts talking back to them, no harm, no foul, because the employee still has rights too, right? And so it's important that you're training your employees on not only company rights, but their rights also when it comes to some of this stuff. So you have to get involved. You have to read some of these cases to understand where it came from. So I just gave a quick synopsis here. The best thing, it doesn't take long to read this court case, Marshall versus Barlow, right? And make sure when you're reading it, you know, it goes up in stages. So there's contentions where it goes up. You need to make sure you're reading the Supreme Court decision.
Okay.
So the next one comes up is United States versus Marjack Poultry. I'm sorry, it's a hard one for me to say. Basically, in this case, what they did is OSHA wanted to expand the inspection on this based off of the injury logs only. And they said they saw some things with the back then, you know, that there was issues they saw where people were getting hurt on the 300 log, and they wanted to expand that inspection over into this part of the plant. And the judge ruled on this that you cannot expand this just on the 300 logs. And so sometimes there's a fear on how we report, and you know, TIRs getting away and things like that. Because now we're submitting these logs online, right? We're not, you know, we're submitting our data online, and we're kind of fearful where does that show up and what will they do with it? And OSHA does have the right to target high hazard industries, and they have the right LEPs for that, which we'll talk about later. But you can't be fearful that you give them the 300 logs and they're going to expand just because they saw your 300 logs, right? It takes a little bit more. It might be a 301. They might ask for the 301. They can come in and say, hey, we saw this accident on your 300 log. Do you have the 301 for that, right? It's important to also know that OSHA can't cite you or can't go back and inspect something that's over 6 months or 180 days. So even if they see something on your 300 log, they can't come and say, well, we want to expand over here because we saw you had an accident here 6 months ago, 7 months ago, because some of these projects last a long time. Well, sorry, that's not only is it done and over with, but it's outside the scope.
Okay, so I guess what you're really getting out of that case law is that just because you have a lot of injuries on your logs, OSHA cannot use that fact alone to come out and do an inspection. So this is more about knowing your rights. This case helps knowing your rights about these inspections. Would that be a correct assessment of that?
Yeah, they can ask for more documentation. They can ask for some other things, but they can't just say, well, we want to go see this over here, right? And so it can, you know, once again, you want to get in and read some of these case laws. That's why I'm bringing them up, is because you have to familiarize yourself with the case itself. And as you read these, all these cases, the reason they made it to this level is because a judge ruled one way at a lower court, right? And then it got kicked up and someone else ruled a different way, right? And so there, a lot of times when you're reading these, you want to make sure you not only read how it finished, but you want to kind of read the arguments about when they won, right? Or what were their arguments there? And then finally, when it got to that higher court system, whatever ruling they came up with, right? You want to know why they overturned it as well. And we can use those sometimes to squash the warrant process, right? It's like you can go back and say, going back to that last case, they got a warrant, but you might be able to squash that warrant if you understand some of these other cases. Like, do they really have a right to be here? Is there what are we expanding this on?
All right. So yeah, it makes perfect sense. So I'm the safety officer for a company. Where do I find these cases at? I mean, do I Google it? Is there a site with all these on? How do I find them?
Well, we're going to get to some of that in a little bit, right? But yeah, you can Google these. By the way, I am not an attorney. I'm not giving law advice at all, right? This is just personal research, and I spend a lot of time reading case law because a lot of misconceptions come from not understanding what the judges have said, right? Just because there's a regulation or just because there's this letter of interpretation, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but understanding it for yourself. There's a lot of value in researching case law and really understanding where it all comes from. The last one, I think a lot of people know, and I think a lot of people on this have seen this court case, but it was a secretary. It's also known as a summit decision, right? It was a big deal there in the 90s, but it's a labor versus summit contracting group. And it really brought about how they look at multi-employer. Multi-employer has been around forever, right? But it really changed how they looked at it. And it really looked at, on this case, the general contractor, could they be cited if they weren't involved? They didn't have anybody on the site. They didn't really control it. Someone else controlled it. Could they be cited for it? And actually, at the beginning, the first judge said no, right? They were going to throw it out. And OSHA appealed it, and they came back and they overruled it. And it changed the way general contractors could be cited for their subcontractors. Also, prime contractors, how they could be cited in correlation with the general and subs. But more importantly, it really opened the bar, and I think a lot of people miss this in how this ruled, is it made it very easy for OSHA now to look at multi-employer and go sub on sub. And so big thing we contend with, holes in the floor, mechanical guys, there's holes in the floors, and we have people in bakers and other scaffolding or benches, and they're working around these holes in the floor. It made them very easy using this case law to expose us to violations created by primes and subs that have nothing to do with us.
That sounds completely unfair. So are you saying basically if the elevator pulls off guardrails, leaves the shaft exposed and leaves, and I have some of my crew working around that floor, what am I supposed to do? I mean, they could be 50 yards away. I mean, does it still apply because they're on the floor and there's an unsafe situation?
That is a great example, and I love the fact that you use that, because actually OSHA, when they look at 500 standard subpart M, there is no safe distance for fall protection. And so let's say you're on that floor. Yes, you could be brought into that, even if you're people, right? You're exposed, right? And sometimes as a subcontractor, you like to go to the general contractor and say, hey, the guardrail's off over there. And the elevator, in your case, the elevator guy left off the guardrail, and you continue to work. Well, you kind of just push yourself into that willful level, because the general contractor got busy, forgot about it. You didn't pull your people from the floor, right? And something happens, you're bringing yourself into those situations. So a lot of times you have to look at it and say, is this something that I'm going to wait around for? Do I need to stop work? Do I want to fix the hazard myself, even though it doesn't belong to me, right? You have to weigh out a lot of things, and the summit decision really opened the door up to not only general contractors, but to subcontractors as well.
this, I guess, makes some sense. It's been a long time since I've been in the trade, but I have noticed that the GC have gotten a lot stricter on safety, and this case law would make sense. What year did this come out? Do you
Oh
know?
my gosh, oh, well, that's a great question.
I stumped you on that one. I know. I was just starting.
I know it's in the early 2000s.
Okay. Well, that makes sense because I was out of the trade by then. I just noticed a big difference from when I was in to now when I go back to jobs. GCs take safety a lot more serious.
Well, and rightfully so. And actually, we bring in subcontractors ourselves, right? And so some of the things the general contractors do to prevent it, we go through these pre-quals and we're all like, oh, you know, we got to go to this pre-qual and we're throwing our TIR out there, we're throwing our EMR out there. And what they're doing is they're actually setting up that defense. Like, did you pre-qual your sub? That's one of the defenses, right? Did you look at the program even? And so it helps if they're doing those types of things. That also goes for us. So if we bring in a subcontractor, right, we should be doing those pre-quals. We should be looking at those people as well, because that ladder just keeps kicking up. So our subcontractor can get us cited, can turn around and get our general contractor cited as well.
Okay.
All right. So with all that's being said, we get OSHA citations and we go through that, and I want to bore a whole lot of people. I know we got some real good experts in the AWCI when it comes to that, but I do want to cover some of the defenses when citations hit. And the defenses that you most hear about are the one, employee misconduct. Everybody's got employee misconduct, right? Lack of knowledge, employer knowledge is another affirmative defense, or infeasibility. And there's lots of types of infeasibility, and we'll talk about those. But these are the three common affirmative defenses. And this is where you say, hey, I know it was a violation, but I don't think it was a citation. There's a difference between the two, right? Violation, yes, it's a law. There's something's been written there. But is it a citation? And this is where that comes in. So biggest one, right? We all hear, and I'm going to start off with this. 5A1, right? General duty clause. You've heard of that, right, Don? General duty clause. The employer has the responsibility to ensure there's a safe workplace and to recognize hazards and to correct them to keep the area safe. The one that is right behind it, and I find it funny because it never gets cited, it never gets used, but honestly, this is where employee misconduct comes from, is Section 5B. The next sign after that, the next law after that, right in the act, and it's not a law, it's in the act, says that the employee has the responsibility to follow all the regulations, all the laws that OSHA has, and also what the employer is also making mandatory. So they say, hey, yeah, they tell you to wear safety glasses, you have to wear safety glasses, right? So that's really where employee misconduct comes from, is Section 5B of the Act, right behind the 5A1. So what do they have to do, right? What are you going to do there, and how do you get there? Well, you must show you have a written work rule, right? It has to be in writing. It has to be in your work rule. You can't say, well, it was in your book. No, it has to be your work rule. You have to show that you're doing frequent and regular inspections to identify those types of hazards. And you must show that you enforce it, right? You have to train on it. You have to, not only doing the inspections, but you have to train on the work rule. You have to make sure they're trained on it, and you're enforcing it. And my time as an OSHA inspection or inspector, I tell you, the one that you've seen that would fail the most, where the loophole was the enforcement piece, right? Great programs, great written programs. In today's world, you hear a lot of times, well, I don't want to be the safety police. I don't want to be the safety cop. And it's a very uncomfortable place to be. And you do want to train first. You do want to do it. But I encourage people not to look at disciplinary action as disciplinary action. It's a simple word change, right? It's retraining, and you're required under this employee misconduct to retrain. It's an opportunity to train again, right? So I'm giving you one opportunity for retraining. That's your first offense. I'm going to give you That might be orally. Second time, I'm going to give you a written retraining event, right? Third time, it's going to be written and you're probably going to take some time off. Fourth time, we're going to let you go because you evidently can't be trained.
Yeah.
You know, but it kind of gets away from the idea of being a cop, but still looking and having an enforcement policy.
Yeah. All right. So let's say I'm a safety manager and I'm a little nonchalant. I don't really, I don't have a lot of written proof that I'm doing inspecting or even enforcing, like you just said, because I want the guys to look good, right? Can that come back to bite the company in an employee misconduct defense if I really don't have any proof that I'm out there writing up the guys that are doing something wrong that should be written up?
Yes, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but unfortunately, it comes back to bite you that you do have it as well. And
It bites you
so,
that you have it, and if you don't
yeah,
have it, well, that's tough.
yeah, it's tough. And I'll explain that right now. That's a great question. Um, one of the weaknesses, right? Employee weaknesses, and what you're bringing up is exactly that. Unfortunately, there's some case law being written right now, and I've seen it firsthand, and I encourage those to, after this call, start doing your own research. But there have been some recent filings from ALJs, administrative law judges, and also the commission, who have said they found when people are arguing employee misconduct, they found that they were not adequate. They were not, they had done frequent and regular inspections, but it wasn't adequate frequent and regular inspections. They saw that they did disciplinary policies, but they found that it wasn't adequate. And some of these court cases, a good court case to review is a 161587. And I'll show you later on how to get to it. That's not the only one. There's lots of them out there. But they said, well, you didn't adequately enforce this. And I saw this with a crane manufacturer or a crane company who said, well, we saw that you had lots of disciplinary against this type of violation. However, you never in the 20 years disciplined anybody for this. It's like, well, wait, maybe you never had the opportunity, but the judge used this as a reason to say, well, maybe your disciplinary policy isn't adequate. Maybe it wasn't being enforced all the time. If you're only enforcing after an accident or after an OSHA inspection, definitely not adequate, right? You have to have it beforehand. Scary part is they're using this word in frequent and regular inspections. And this is where I myself am kind of like rattled by it. That frequent and regular inspections weren't adequate. They weren't adequate because they didn't see the violation. They never noticed this violation before, or that that maybe they weren't doing it enough in the judge's opinion, right? And what's scary about this is the standard actually says the employer must do frequent and regular inspections. Them adding this word of adequacy kind of scares me because it almost makes it a performance standard. And a performance standard, difference between a performance standard and a regular standard is that a performance standard, there's a great one in wall bracing, for instance. Wall bracing, there's a performance standard because it says the wall must be adequately braced. And I remember citing this a few times as an OSHA inspector. And it wasn't about whether there was 2 braces on it, 3 braces, 4 braces on it, or if there was 100 braces on it. If the wall fell, it wasn't adequately braced. If it stayed standing, it must be adequately braced. Kind of a performance standard. And so if we're starting to see these rulings come out that says, hey, your frequent and regular inspections must not be adequate because someone got hurt doing this and evidently you didn't see it, you've got to be kind of careful. You've got to kind of be careful. What are you giving away? And going back to your question, you're giving all this documentation saying, yes, I've written all these people up and here's the stuff I've written them up for. Well, judge could look at it and say, well, maybe you're disciplinary isn't adequate because you seem to only write people up for safety glasses or locking wheels, and this is a GFI offense, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, I think the word adequate is tough because to me it seems like a judgment call. But what you're basically saying, what I'm hearing you say is if I've got a bunch of write-ups across a lot of different issues, are you saying that could actually be a good thing because I covered so many different things? I still got a lot of write-ups, but it was broad and it went across basically all the different issues. You're saying that's a good thing?
yeah, definitely. And we retrained on a whole bunch of different topics. How about that? Let's that word in our industry. We retrained on a whole bunch of topics. We retrained a whole bunch of individuals on a whole bunch of different topics, right? If we look at this as training opportunities and not disciplinary, it opens up us as safety people, as superintendents, to say, "Hey, this is retraining. This is all this is, right?" We do need to get away from that word discipline. The actions are the same, right? You're still documenting, you're still retraining, you're still educating. However, get away from the idea of discipline. It just opens that up a little bit more.
I've noticed that in the 3 safety peer reviews, all the companies use that. They don't call it discipline, they call it retraining. That's a good term there. Okay, so you said that judges are inserting the word adequate in front of frequent and regular inspections. What does that change legally, and why is that so dangerous? I mean, it just seems like it's such a vague word that they could use any way they want.
I'm gonna let this everybody do their own reading, right? Like once again, I'm not an attorney, but it definitely does put it on that forefront. Like you think you're doing a good job, you're going to a job once a week, right? And you're inspecting, you're looking at it thorough, but something over here you just hadn't got to, or maybe you didn't get there that week, or you did get there that week, but somebody still got hurt because you missed something, right? I mean, we are human, right? So what does it take to do an adequate inspection? A lot of us like the inspection checklist. I'm re-looking at our checklist right now because of some of these court cases. There was one that I read where they said, well, the item that is being cited here was not part of your checklist. Oh my Lord. I don't have a huge checklist. It is items that we're paying attention to, but does our checklist cover every item within 1926 and part of 1910? No. Does it cover every 5A1 that we could be exposed to? No, right? But does that mean you're doing inadequate inspections? And I think there's future arguments to be made here, to be fair.
Matt, you made a comment before, I heard you talk about this, where you've got a 15-day period where you could talk to the OSHA inspector if you did get a citation. Could you kind of elaborate on that? How does that work?
Well, a lot of people know. Let's hold off on that one.
Okay.
Let's hold off on that one. We'll get that on another slide. Hold that
Okay.
thought. That's a good
All
one.
right. All right.
We're getting really deep here.
Okay.
So, lack of employer knowledge, right? This one is affirmative defense. Is much harder to prove, right? And you're playing on some shady ground here when you start talking about lack of employer knowledge, because knowledge is only should have and could have knowledge, right? It's not direct knowledge, right? Did you know that person was going to be there? Did you know they had the ability to be in this area? That should have and could have knowledge, right? It's a much harder defense to prove. It's a shorter term time frame, right? I'm going to tell you right now, if it was over a shift, forget employer knowledge. If it was there yesterday and it's there today, knowledge is gone, right? Even within 4 hours, right? It gets very shady. You're almost walking up, like you're walking through a job site and you happen to walk across an employee that doesn't have his wheels locked and he's skating across on a baker, right? And then it really boils down to that employee interview. What's that employee going to say, And I guarantee some of the things are going to be, does your employer force this? Do they have a work rule on this? Have they told you not to do this in the past? How long have you been doing this? If that employee says we do it all the time, your knowledge is really in your face, right? So it's very hard to prove this. And foreman knowledge is enough knowledge, right? They treat that as should have and could have knowledge. I see a lot of these as an inspector. Employers come and would argue this, and they would say, well, yeah, our foreman knew about it, but our management, our people, our safety person, our superintendent, our project manager, our owner didn't know about it. Boy, that's a different ballgame, right? Because now you just stepped in willful land, right? Your foreman knowing is willful, right? That creeps up into another thing. It's also employee misconduct, but it's really management misconduct. Management misconduct, it's a part of, you got to do a lot more, right? So maybe you, under a first offense, you would just recounsel someone. Well, if you're going to prove management misconduct, you have to show that your foreman's first offense, you're sending them home for 3 days. And maybe on the third offense, you're sending them home for 3 days. Well, on the third offense, you're firing or demoting foreman. And so it becomes much harder burden to prove. But that knowledge base, right? You got to have it. Some of the most successful places I see employer knowledge coming into is 5A1s. Did they have the knowledge of that 5A1? Is there an industry standard out there that said, hey, you shouldn't be doing this? And it's well known throughout that industry, right? Then maybe, right? But if you're looking at long time frames, that 5A1 area is probably where that employer knowledge comes in at.
All right, let me give you an example then. So, got a foreman, he lines out the guy with all the fall protection gear he needs, but he just doesn't use it. It seems like there's a fine line between lack of employer knowledge and employee misconduct. So, I'll say that again. So, if I got a foreman, lines out the employee with all the fall protection and he just doesn't use it, which one does that fall under? Employee knowledge or employee misconduct?
Both. And that's great. That's great because if it's already set up, it's already there, right? That means the employer anticipated what needed to be done. They had the knowledge he was going to be there. They set it all up. Everything was inspected. It was set up that way. That employee failing to do that at that time and use that tie-off point or failing to connect up his D-ring definitely is not only lack of knowledge, right? But it's also employee misconduct. But you better be ready to prove the training element there.
Okay.
Okay. Because if you maybe the the lack of knowledge is there, but you don't have employee misconduct, right? You're getting into shadier areas. You're usually using lack of knowledge as the basis for employee misconduct.
Okay. Do you have an example of management misconduct?
Same thing that you just said, and your foreman sent him up to the roof. They assigned him the roof, but never went up and looked at it or never came up with a fall protection plan, right? What are
Yeah.
you going to do about that? When you run across that, what do you do about that before the citation hits, right? What did you do about it the last time, 3 or 4 times, right? You got to have some strong examples there. Let's face it, a lot of us are kind of weak in that, right? I mean, hey, that's our foreman, right? You counsel them, you do all that stuff, but do you take harsher steps necessarily? Probably not.
Okay.
Hey, and we're not pitcher pepper. We run into the same issues here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the other one is infeasibility, and I tell you, infeasibility is definitely an area you need to be careful of. Make sure you have attorneys if you're going to be saying, well, that's not feasible. It is definitely crossing into the willful land because the arguments is financially, it's just infeasible. I've yet to run across a court case that has won this. As a matter of fact, think about the argument itself, Don.
Yeah.
It's too expensive to have made this right.
Not gonna fly. Yeah.
That's all day long, right? Means of abatement. Well, there's just not means of abatement. There's a case I was personally involved in, had to do with general industry and the pallet manufacturing, or disassembling, if you will. So they would get in and recycle pallets, and they'd cut pallets, and they had this pallet saw, and it's manufactured and it's made to push pallets through, cut the pallet apart, cut the nails off of it, and then recycle the lumber, make new pallets. Well, there was no guard on it. Well, it became really hard to how do you guard this? How do you go about guarding this machine? And what was a means of abatement to do it? Became very difficult. And what they end up, after going through lots of manufacturers of the saw, they came up with, okay, maybe it's a painted line or a tape line on the saw that says this. And if you can only imagine a horizontal bandsaw and you're pushing a pallet through it to disassemble it, well, you couldn't put a laser across it, because as soon as the pallet would hit the laser, it would shut it off, right? And it had to be wide enough and thick enough that the pallet would fit through it. So the distance idea was a little bit, you have a big opening, you could get your hands through it. And so between tooling and also some warning lines on the saw, they came up with a means of abatement, but there really was an infeasibility argument there that OSHA had to work through. Creating a greater hazard. One of those, do you wear a paper mask, right? There's things that can create a greater hazard. The abatement itself creates a greater hazard in itself to fix it. It is an argument. Some good cases to review. These usually happen in 5A1s. To say there's something in the standard that if you did it the way they tell you to do it in the standard, it creates a greater hazard. A little bit difficult. But there are some good court cases out there about it. There's some written there, 3 of them. One that personally saw, and it's not, the argument was made up front. So if you have a greater hazard type of thing going into an area, one of the ones I remember most was done right here in Toledo. The contractor argued he wanted a variance. So if you got something, and this was right in the standard, wearing a harness and lanyard in a boom lift, and they had this boom lift actually on a barge on the river. And the argument was made that, hey, we cannot wear a harness. We don't want to be tied off to this machine, because if something was to happen where this machine was to go over, or something would happen to the barge, the employees tied to it, they could possibly drown. And OSHA actually allowed a variance to not wear a harness in the boom lift while working above water on this bridge off of this. But there's a case right there. You want to make those arguments up front, if you will, right? Ask for forgiveness. Ask for the change first. Ask for the variance first. And I will tell you, variances take a while to get done. So they're not overnight type of things. And just because you see a variance online doesn't mean you are automatically have the variance, right? So I can't look at that case and say, well, that means I don't have to wear it either when I go across on the barge. No, it doesn't work that way. And to use that variance in the argument of it creates a greater hazard, although a very good argument, is not very sound one.
Okay, so out of these 3 infeasibility defenses, which would be the most defensible if you're a contractor?
Probably creates a greater hazard.
Okay.
But you got a lot of proving to do there.
I could see that. That's probably the one I would have picked too. I think because everybody's got an example of that where it could be a greater hazard. So that makes sense.
Yep. So we get into protect yourself. How do you protect yourself? I just laid out all this stuff like, wow, if you do this, there's, well, is inspections good enough? Is discipline? How do you go about really protecting yourself? And I tell you, it's getting harder and harder, but there are ways. The first thing is know your local emphasis programs, and not only your local emphasis programs. I encourage you that if you're only working in one state, right, you start looking at states, all of them, right? One thing that I don't know if everybody knows is how OSHA just redistrict themselves, right? There's still 10 districts out there. They still have 10 of them, but this is the old one right here, right? This is near is where the regions change. Regions 1 through 10, they change. This is the old days. This is where they're at now. So they took the whole entire West Coast and said, you're all in Region 10 now, right? Difference. And what did they do? How did they make that? The 10th region is now Kentucky, Tennessee, Arizona, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. And this is curious, Don. They split a state in half. Florida. I found it very interesting that they took the panhandle and said, okay, LEPs over here could be one thing, and LEPs on this side could be something totally different. So imagine having a building right there. Looks like maybe, what is that? Panama area, and this side is in one district, and this, or one region, this side's in the other region. Kind of interesting. I found that neat. But understand the local emphasis programs. Know what's happening in other states. Here's a list of them, right? You can go on the website and on OSHA's website and find these LEPs, but make sure you're reading them. Make sure you understand what some of this language is. I don't know that I agree with all the LEPs, but they're written, they're being used, right? And we need to understand them. They tend to test out LEPs in certain regions and then expand them into other regions, right? I highlighted some of these that as I read through them, and I found them very interesting. Like, really, they're getting away with this there in those places? The one that's down in Atlanta, electrical hazards, right? Which basically says if they see power lines going across your job site and you have a I'm sorry, a JLG type of lift or um, all-terrain forklift, that they can stop and do the inspection because it's an electrical hazard going across your job site. Cranes, right, going across your job site. They didn't have to see a hazard; they just had to see the power lines. Another one that I found interesting out in San Francisco, the California Region 10 area. This is for all of Region 10. They basically have said that they're getting away from the Dodge style programmed inspections and that it was unfair or it wasn't giving OSHA an opportunity to get to the right job sites, right? Because not all job sites end up there. And so they said that what they're going to do in order to create their Dodge list is they'll allow their inspectors to drive around, get a list of construction sites, give them to the area director, and the area director would then make up a fair and balanced inspection checklist. But you talked about earlier about retaliation, right? I don't know, right? I have some questions about that because I remember some time ago that they're talking about how they had to create those Dodge lists. I mean, I have to go back in my recall bank there, but it had to come from a non-biased source, right? So I'm not sure how this one's working and how it got into existence and where it came from and how it came about. But you need to understand them, right? You need to know what you're up against. There's one in Chicago that talks about high rises. That points out just high rises in Chicago, right? Gut and rehab right here in Ohio. A lot. Hey, your old building, they see a chute on the outside. That's reason to come in and look. But if you read further into that program, it's more than that, right? It's, hey, maybe the whole thing's done, right? And so understanding these LEPs about when they start and when they begin in this inspection process and really understanding those LEPs is important. And you may hear about them and you hear about them just like we're talking about now. I'm bringing some of them up right now. You're like, oh, well, Matt Taylor said this LEP says this. I encourage you, look it and read it for yourself. understand what it is you are up against and your company's up against, right?
All right. So this seems a little confusing to me that they broke them out into different regions. So I got a question on that. Who creates these? Is it a board, a membership, or is each region on their own? And I can't help but ask this question. Is there any revenue motive behind keeping them alive?
Are you asking for my personal opinion?
Yeah, of course, yes.
Well, I would say that it's no coincidence that you see some of these popping up in different regions, right? Gut rehab started here in Region 5. Well, it's still Region 5, right? Now we see it over in Philadelphia. We see it in different areas, right? Yes, they're created to stop high hazard industries. Let's be honest about it, right? But believe me, if they're not creating some revenue, I question whether or not they would be in existence. The reason they're creating revenue is because they're still finding the hazards, right? They're easy to find. Fall protection has always been there, always number one, right? You drive around and see fall protection, they're going to stop and do it. But if you notice, there's some of these regions that don't have a focus on fall protection, right? Another one I found interesting was there's one down, I believe it's in Atlanta region now, or maybe it's down near one of them. Let's see, it was, yes, Atlanta, where they're saying, hey, if you're a construction site on a military installation, we're going to stop and do the inspection, right? They're right. It's a federal property. And so you look at some of these, and then in Birmingham then has that same one. So I think you really have to understand what's happening in different areas, because what's happening next door to you in a different region could find its way into your region pretty quickly.
All right. So as a drywall contractor, is there any LEP that is maybe most concerning for a contractor, or any of them legally shaky? Like,
Once
shouldn't
again,
really be on
I'm
there.
not an attorney, but understanding some of these other court cases and where they came from, I question it, right? How does an area inspector just drive around and pick out sites that, hey, you're a construction site, we're putting you on a Dodge?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know how that came about. And there's a reading some of those, I'm sure they went through some legal ground. Have they been challenged? I haven't seen anywhere that these have been challenged.
Okay.
Know the industry. So we talk about this, knowing your LEPs, knowing all that stuff, but really know your industry. And I think a lot of times we all have seen the 10 most cited, right? I'm surprised about the number of people who don't know that they can go in and find their industry's most cited, right? So we're talking about creating checklists for inspections, frequent and regular inspections. How do you set that up? What is it that OSHA is looking for? And if you go into their website, and we'll go into frequent and regular, right? You can pull it up by industry, and so right down here you can put in the NIC code, and you can actually put the size of the company in, and they're going to tell you how many citations were written. Excuse me. How many citations were written for that industry for that year. So right now, this is working off of, I do believe, 2024. Somewhere I thought I saw that. Do you see it on here, Don?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So if we look at the drywall industry, right, we've all seen the top 10, but the list does change, right? And so 2025, 2024 through 2025, it's up top. The list does change, right? It's not fall protection, and it's not necessarily scaffolding, and stuff comes right down. If you look at this 451, definitely the scaffolding. So we look at across the nation, and this is federal contractors only. there's 262 citations written on drywall contractors total out of 115 inspections. This is total amount of money in that one given year, right? For scaffold, this is 451. This is the number of citations and the dollar amount. Fall protection right there, right, top two. And then we turn into respiratory protection, right? Respiratory protection. You look at the top 10 of construction, respiratory is in the top 10, but it's not number 3, right? Aerial lifts, ladders, asbestos, right? Top 10. So where's this coming from? Your gut rehabs, right? Where is this coming from? That's the next question. Notice this: 2 inspections, 18 violations. That means when they come into a gut rehab, you better have your stuff together, right? Nine violations average per inspection, right? So you can start to see some of your exposure risk here. Likewise, some of us are using that framing contractor, right? So we're also framers. We do metal framing, right? Well, you switch it over. Now all of a sudden, look, our top 10 changes. Now we're talking about fall protection is still there, right? But eye and face protection. Ladders all of a sudden are climbing less training. Nowhere in here are we seeing respirators. And this is just the top 10, right? We also see that the number of citations increase, the number of inspections increase, right? Some of this is due to they see residential framing. They're coming into this category, right? It's not just metal studs and drywall. So we start to see this list. But if I'm going to create an inspection checklist, you better believe I'm kind of looking at this list and saying, here's the areas that we're going to inspect. And this is why it's made our list. Right? This starts to become an argument, right? Because, like I said, you can't have an inspection checklist that covers all of 1926. We just aren't equipped to do that. You better have the knowledge of it, though.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something that I do every year. I just kind of look and see, hey, are we still on track? Are we still looking for the right things? Are we training on the right things? So with that, I just about skipped over the best slide. I was telling you, hey, here's a good court case. Review it here, review it. This is where you review court cases. And so there's 2 types. I think you've heard me throw around the term ALJ a lot. That's administrative law judge. And then you got the commission. ALJ is the first court case that you'll go to if you appeal, right? That's administrative law judge. And then if that appeal gets pushed or the other party, whether it be OSHA or the contractor appeals it, it goes to the commission. And the commission can choose or not choose to hear it. So if I go to that website, there are some. And for those who've never been here, the link, I think AWCI is going to share some of the links here. But this is where you kind of come in and do some court case searching. And unfortunately, you have to come in here and you have to do the looking. Knowing this ahead of time, a lot of people will come in and research stuff after they get the citations. I'm kind of sick. I like coming in and reviewing this thing. I like reading case law. But how you can use this, if you look, the search engine right here, I can search many different ways. I can search an individual court case and instantly that court case is going to come up. I can search by a contractor's name. I can search by just anything. And so like for this, employee misconduct, right? I preset this one. Here's all the court cases that the commission itself ruled on that had something to do with employee misconduct, right? And then here's some administrative law judges' decisions that came out that they argued employee misconduct. Now, I will tell you, most of the time that you're going to see arguments being made, it's going to be based off of employee misconduct. But if you click any one of these cases, and we'll just let's go with this one. Let's see what we got here. I'm just pulling the one up randomly. What I tend to do is you'll bore yourself. I've always found this as a way of doing it. I don't read the whole case because I much would rather read a case in which the employer lost than they won, right? Because I hear the arguments that were made, but then I also start to read why the judge said, no, it's not a good argument, right? That helps me tighten up my program, right? A lot of times when you read these decisions and they won, some of the decisions that they write basically say, yes, we agree, delete the citation. And so it's that simple, and you don't learn anything. But if you go all the way to the very bottom of any of these court cases, and that's how I always research and look, is I want to come in here and look at the final, right? And it should tell you right at the end, and watch, this one won't for me for some reason. Oh, so right here, very end, right? The alleged violation, 1918-74. So this is actually maritime. It was vacated, right?
Okay.
It has something to do with merit. It has something to do with employee misconduct, but it was vacated. If I come across one that says is nope, we're keeping the penalty, I read that one. That's the one I want to read. I don't want to, you know, the ones that win, they're great, but the ones that lose, you learn so much information by understanding why they lost. And then you'll start to see some of these words adequate come up. Adequate inspections, adequate disciplinary policy. That's where you'll learn a lot, and you'll understand where these judges are coming from. The judges are different too. Understand politics do get rolled up in it, whether you like it or not, right? Politics are involved. And so you can have one judge down in Texas see the case one way, and the same type of scenario happened up here in Ohio, and the judge up here looks at it totally different. And so when you're looking at these cases and trying to build up a defense, I had this happen first-handedly, where it came back. I was looking for a summary judgment on something, and the judge that was hearing the case basically said, you provided us with letters of interpretation and this court case, right? And she said, I will take them under advisement, but understand I am not obligated to listen to either one of these. So you got, we're running off letters of interpretation, or you find this great LAJ decision that goes in your favor and says, hey, this judge over here said this. Well, unless it was the same judge from the same area, they may say, that's great, but I don't have to listen to that person. But you do have to listen to commission decisions. So try and find a commission decision that says what you're looking for. If you can't, go after the LJ, right? I've used them. And more importantly, when you're reading these court cases, some of these court cases are going to quote other court cases. Follow the trail. Don't stop by just stopping there. Understand when they say, hey, we're going back to the ones I showed you, the Summit decision, and we're going back to this, right? These are the ones that are always popping up.
Okay.
And go back and read those. Go back and read those too, right?
Yeah.
Time.
All right, Matt, we're down to 1 minute left. I got one final question for you. If you had to leave this group with one single best way to protect their company, and I know that's asking a lot, but what would that be? Just a couple of the biggest things you would take away to protect your company when it comes to OSHA.
Perfect. Last slide. Peer review, peer groups. Review your program annually. Keep updated, right? Keep yourself going. The minute you think you know it all,
Mhm.
they change it. Another court case comes out. It changes everything you know. 35 years of doing this, and the things I knew back then have already changed, right? One court case comes out, one regulation changes, one letter of interpretation is gone, right? I will tell you, if you got a letter of interpretation you like, print it out. Don't count on it always being there, right? It'll be gone. But peer group involvement, I tell you, this is the best group that you can belong to. If you're not part of it, get part of it, because we're dealing with, there's no secrets here. We have no secrets. The dirty laundry is already out there. I already know about your citations. If something happens, an accident happens, it's already public, right? There's nothing to hide from. Safety as competitors, right? There is no secret. It's already out there. All we can do is share our knowledge, share what we have, what we've experienced. And peer group involvement is the best way to protect your company, right? I
Yeah.
learned so much from this group and AGC groups and other safety groups I belong to. Talk to one another. Don't be shy, right? Get out there. Um, don't be afraid to ask for help, because at the end, there really are no secrets. Your information's already public.
Exactly. Matt, that was great. I personally learned a lot on that, and you teed up the AWCI Safety and Health Committee. Anybody wants to get involved in that, please reach out to me. We do have peer safety group, peer safety peer groups that we do twice a year. We'll go out to a contractor and we'll do one of those reviews with them. So if your company wants to get involved in that, please let me know. And we did not, Brianna did not say questions in the beginning because this was kind of a different format where I was going to be asking a lot of questions. If you do have any questions, Brianna, was there any in the chat? I don't think
I
we
did
covered
not
that.
see any come through.
Okay, all right. You guys know me as well. Do we have a slide with email addresses on there on the last one? I'm not sure if we put that on
Oh,
there.
I do not.
Okay. All right. Well, guys, I'll say mine then for the record. If you got any questions, it's a really easy one. It's Pilz, Pilz at awci.org. So if you got any questions for Matt, you can pass them on to me, and I'll pass them on to Matt, and we'll get you taken care of. I appreciate everybody's time and listen to this. You will get a copy of it. I know there's a lot of information in some of those links, so you'll get a copy of this as well. And thank you all for joining.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay.